Hey everyone, it is Dan Keldsen here, and today's topic is Client Success Management or Customer Success Management. So this is more from the software or hardware, cloud or otherwise point of view. Suppliers, providers selling into customers and making sure that they have delivered success and are there for the success with their customers or clients. The old model of enterprise sales, as everybody who's lived through it knows, is that largely enterprise clients are left to fend for themselves after the contract has been signed. Typically a third party, a system integrator of some kind, or somebody who is not the original supplier steps in to actually do the implementation. And for the most part, the relationship with the company that you bought the solution from is over, with some exceptions, of course. But generally, it's really kind of left up to the client to manage their own success, and that can be very difficult for a lot of clients. This is also known as life beyond the sale. So there is life beyond the sale. There's no value created for a client unless there's a successful implementation, and you would hope many successful implementations, assuming that it's the sort of solution that lends itself to that, or at least ongoing success, right? Not just a single point in time. So it's really, it's time that non-SaaS companies wrap their heads around this, because it's really a problem. Client success management does not happen unless you put in the effort and you put in processes and standards and the teams that are built to manage it. And it's very different than traditional sales models, and even from an implementation standpoint, which tends to be very project driven and not sort of ongoing relationship and success focused, which is maybe a subtle difference. I think it's a pretty significant difference. Now, what happens in most cases, again, as I just mentioned, is that the sale is made and then suddenly the client feels like they've been abandoned, much like Macaulay Culkin in Home Alone, or whoever the youngster there is in Home Alone 3, which I am sort of happy I've not seen. So maybe you're not home alone in this case, you are workplace alone, you're left to fend for yourselves. But that needs to change. So client success does not happen just on its own. You do need to design a client success process. This is not rocket science. It's been pretty well thought out. It's been shown as a winner for Salesforce, among others. They're sort of the poster child for this. But anybody, especially coming from a SaaS world, knows exactly what this is, or if they don't, they are probably not going to be successful. So to me, as somebody who kind of watches what goes on inside and outside of enterprises into the B2C world and B2B world, I'm always looking to find the best of the best to bring to any particular practice that I'm involved in. And I think it's really worth taking a hard look at client success or customer success, because it does not happen by accident, and there's a whole bunch of things you need to watch out for. So the good news is, I'm not trying to scare you off to not do this. It doesn't need to be complex. You can start with anything and level up from there, which I'm using level up specifically because I'm going to be talking about gamification in a moment here. And it's really a focus on not just doing a big bang sort of win, but making sure that you have sustainable effort put in place to make sure that you get your initial success and you sustain it and then continue and expand it. So what do I mean? So I happened to take back about 10 years ago or so a gamification workshop with Amy Jo Kim, who's very well known in the space. She has a formal game designer background, and she has moved, sort of straddled the world of game design as well as gamification, which, if you're not aware of gamification, is taking game design concepts and applying them to non-game situations. I ran across this when I was very involved in doing Enterprise 2.0 consulting work. She has a great simple model, which I think is incredibly useful. First, we'll take a look at it from a game perspective. So she has 3 key stages in the gamer lifecycle. This is, as my sidebar there shows, mapping skills and interest at the player level. So you design as a game designer, and there are hundreds and thousands of people on major game projects, which I'm not saying you need to do. But you do need somebody, probably a small team at least, that is focused on understanding this sort of growth and leveling up that successful clients will need to go through if you're going to maintain them and have them for the long term. So in her model, you start as a newbie. Everybody starts as a newbie. Even if you've played the same kind of game before, you don't know this game exactly until you do. And to get out of that brand new mindset, there's some onboarding required, and game companies pay a lot of attention to onboarding. I find that enterprises pay almost zero attention to onboarding. Enterprise software companies, if they're coming from an as-a-service world, they pay a lot of attention, but traditional enterprise software often does not. And that's a huge loss, because if you don't get that right, that foundation is critical. And if it's not there, it's going to end up in probably a bad place later down the line by the time your contract renews. From there, you level up into regular use, where you're building habits instead of being completely unaware of how to play the game and what the controls are, what the objectives are. And from there, if you want to progress, then you spend more time, you get better at it, you level up, you get new items as a player, and you potentially reach mastery. Now, of course, not everybody reaches mastery. Not everybody wants to reach mastery. They're just doing it for enjoyment, and they don't need to be the best in the world. But for those who do, you need to build a path for that, because they will get bored otherwise, that sort of class of super user. You can see the dotted lines there that fall off. I'll talk about that more on the next version of this that I'm going to show you. But game designers, especially these days, because there's so much in-app purchases and things that happen after the initial either purchase or download of a free game, that if you are not leveling people up so that they still get enjoyment from the experience, then you will never have the sort of long-term revenue stream that the best games have, which tends to last for at least a year, if not multiple years. There's still plenty of games that I know that I play and other people play that they bought 5 years ago, and they still spend some money on it on a regular basis to level up or get new equipment, whatever it happens to be. So how does this apply to the enterprise? So to me, I'm just going to modify this a little bit because I like simple models, and I think this is very directly applicable in client success. So I remapped this a little bit, and keep in mind that here it's less at the individual level, although there's hints of that, but it's really about maturity. I've been a big fan of maturity models for enterprises. I think it's very useful. Everybody starts somewhere, and not everybody wants to be a master, right? So you don't have to be in the 99.9 percentile. You don't have to be Six Sigma to have a really good business. But if that's the direction that you want to aspire to, how are you going to get there? So you got to move from where you are, level up kind of one at a time, because it's very hard to go from not knowing anything to be a master of your industry. So this is really mapping maturity and the scale at both the organizational level and the relationship level between you as a software hardware supplier and the client who's going to get benefit from it. So again, we start at newbie. They clearly don't know your platform, whatever it is that you offer, as well as you do. So what can you do to get them up and running and do onboarding? From there, in most customer success and client success roles, they talk about nurturing as you're building the relationship and making sure that implementations are happening and everybody's aware of that and are getting value. Ultimately up to, in my language, I like to use champions as your internal reps who want success to happen. And from a customer success perspective, the selling company's perspective is really about harvesting, which I think is, I actually have a farming background from a part of my family, but it's really about making the most of that relationship and delivering value. It's not about trying to force selling something. It's often actually about the customer saying, hey, this was so fantastic. What else do you have for me? Like, I need more training for my developers, for example, so that I can actually drive more value here. And as you see, I've specifically labeled the dotted lines typically as churn, which, losing your company or downsizing the contract, which happens a lot if you don't do this very well. So you might notice that there is only one churn that has a question mark in it. If you don't get to past nurturing and find a way to level up or expand how your client is using your product, it's probably because your product doesn't have that much functionality, and maybe that's on purpose. But generally, if they don't have a reason to continuously be looking at new ways that they can use whatever it is that you offer, or expand it into different departments or regions or whatever the case might be, then sooner or later they might forget about you, and that is not good news for you as a company. And ultimately, of course, what everybody wants, if you're on the selling side, is to expand and renew and have a nice long relationship that hopefully lasts for a very, very long time, and everybody's getting value out of that. Now, all along the way, you have all the touch points of a client success lifecycle, which can be quarterly business reviews. It can be implementation checks with the partners that are running implementations, or whoever it is, your own team that might be doing that. It can be updates on the roadmap for your offering, so they're aware of what's coming along and has not yet shipped, or what has shipped and how it might apply to them. All those touch points, which are a combination of both manual and automatic touch points, probably, are built into this. And it's an ongoing constant cycle that you're running through. Lots of little loops here. It would be a little harder to read it if I put a lot of loops, so I just put arrows. But there's tons and tons of loops here all along the life of this relationship, and it's all meant to make sure that you're always delivering value. It's not about being annoying and trying to upsell. It's really about putting the customer first, making sure that they're happy, and all the stakeholders and everybody that needs to be happy, that will see the value, so that they have, they can see that you have ownership of the success of this customer and that you're enabling them. You're not there to handhold them and force them to pay you for things that should probably be baked in, which is another difference in this model. But you're really there providing a service, which is to make sure that they are successful. I have another very simple model that I'll talk about in another video. It's about the engagement life cycle. I think there's not enough attention paid on the actual implementation side, on pre-engagement, the actual engagement of a standing up an implementation, and re-engagement after the fact. But I'll talk about that more in another video. So I'm curious, if you don't yet have a client success process, what do you think it should look like? Do you agree with what I'm proposing? And if you do, how does this match up with what you're doing? Comment below if you could, and stay tuned for more. I'm going to be planning on delivering a series of other videos here and audio podcasts, so stay tuned.